everyone, welcome back to Lifting the Lamp. I'm Frater Eleftheria, and Happy New Year, by the way. In this video, I'm going to talk about what I believe to be a supremely important topic for spiritual development, for the development of those who are on the esoteric path. And it has to do with a particular text within the curricula of various Western esoteric orders. But this particular book is highly, highly underrated, in my opinion. Buried in the AA curriculum, not really given a lot of importance. This is a text which began its life as part of the Golden Dawn's material and was then taken by Crowley and tweaked a little bit, and then he passed it off as his own work, calling it Liber 30. But it was originally in the Golden Dawn known as On the General Guidance and Purification of the Soul. And basically what this text is a series of nuggets of very hard-hitting wisdom for how to live a good life, how to develop your character, and how to be good at magic as well. But it's very much about the moral development of a person, which is why it's not given as much importance in something like the AA, where traditional moral principles are not given much importance at all. But in my own experience, exploring the spiritual path and exploring the Western esoteric tradition, if your goal really is to understand the mysteries of the universe, to understand truth, to develop yourself, and to better embody holiness, and to improve your relationship with God, with the divine, and move towards a union with the divine, this text is more important than almost any other of the texts that you'll find in the curricula of, well, particularly the AA grades. Because here's the thing. You can know how to rise through the planes and project your astral body anywhere in the universe or the multiverse or any dimension. You can memorize the meanings of all the tarot cards and be great at reading them. You can know how to conjure spirits to visible appearance. You can know how to sit still in dragon pose for 1 hour so that if a bowl of water is put on top of your head, it will not tilt and it will not fall down because you are so still. You can accumulate all of the different grades and all of the different titles and honors from all the initiations, so that you've got a special little certificate that says that you're part of the supreme sovereign sanctuary of blah, 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 whatever order, the grand poobah of whatever meaningless club that somebody made up. It's all pointless. You can spend your years of your life doing all of that, and if your goal is true spiritual development, it will be completely vain and pointless. Because what's really important is the development and refinement of your character, morally, spiritually, psychologically. And that is what On the General Guidance and Purification of the Soul teaches us to do. At least it gives us an introduction to how to do that. If not most, then many of the key lessons about developing ourselves that we need to learn on the path. But it's a general guidance, as the title suggests. So it gives you summaries of what that lesson is, but you can go much deeper into that. So I'm going to try and go deeper to give you the full benefit of this amazing text. This is something that I've read before in one of the initiations that I was involved in my own journey through esoteric societies. I won't say which, because that would involve giving away secrets that I swore an oath to not give away. But in some initiation somewhere, I was an officer, and it was my task to read Liber 30, kind of give a lecture or an oration to someone else who was being initiated, as my role in that initiation. And it was, I could see, something that had a profound effect on this initiate. It blew their mind. And and gave them a really solid sense of direction and purpose on the path. And so I'd like to do that for all of you now. I'd like to read to you the original unadulterated version of this lecture and let you benefit from it, and then go into detail on a few key points that I've highlighted where I think there's some real wisdom that we can mine out of this text. So here is, first of all, a reading of On the General Guidance and Purification of the Soul. Learn first, O practicus of our ancient order, that true equilibrium is the basis of the soul. If thou thyself hast not a sure foundation, whereon wilt thou stand to direct the forces of nature? Know then that as man is born into this world amidst the darkness of nature and the strife of contending forces, so must his first endeavour be to seek the light through their reconciliation. Thus, thou who hast trial and trouble of this life, rejoice because of them, for in them is strength, and by their means is a pathway opened unto that light divine. How should it be otherwise, O man, whose life is but a day in eternity, a drop in the ocean of time? How, if thy trials were not many, couldst thou purge thy soul from the dross of earth? Is it but now that the higher life is beset with dangers and difficulties? Hath it not been ever thus with the sages and hierophants of the past? They have been persecuted and reviled. They have been tormented of men, yet through this has their glory increased. Rejoice therefore, O initiate, for the greater thy trial, the brighter thy triumph. When men shall revile thee and speak against thee falsely, hath not the Master said, Blessed art thou? Yet, O practicus, let thy victories bring thee not vanity, for with increase of knowledge should come increase of wisdom. He who knows little thinketh he knows much, but he who knoweth much hath learnt his own ignorance. Seest thou a man wise in his own conceit? There is more hope of a fool than of him. Be not hasty to condemn others' sin. How knowest thou that in their place thou couldst have resisted the temptation? And even were it so, why shouldst thou despise one who is weaker than thyself? Be thou well sure of this, that in slander and self-righteousness is sin. Pardon therefore the sinner, but encourage not the sin. The Master condemned not the adulterous woman, but neither did he encourage her to commit the sin. Thou therefore who desirest magical gifts, be sure that thy soul is firm and steadfast, for it is by flattering thy weaknesses that the evil one will gain power over thee. Humble thyself before thy God, yet fear neither man nor spirit. Fear is failure, and the forerunner of failure, and courage is the beginning of virtue. Therefore fear not the spirits, but be firm and courteous with them, for thou hast no right either to despise or to revile them, and this too may lead thee into sin. Command and banish the evil ones, curse them by the great names of God if need be, but neither mock nor revile them, for so assuredly thou wilt be led into error. A man is what he maketh himself within the limits fixed by his inherited destiny. He is a part of mankind. His actions affect not himself only, but also those with whom he is brought into contact, either for good or for evil. Neither worship nor neglect the physical body, which is thy temporary connection with the outer and material world. Therefore let thy mental equilibrium be above disturbances by material events. Restrain the animal passions and nourish the higher aspirations. The emotions are purified by suffering. Do good unto others for God's sake, not for reward, not for gratitude from them, not for sympathy. If thou art generous, thou wilt not long for thine ears to be tickled by expressions of gratitude. Remember that unbalanced force is evil, that unbalanced severity is but cruelty and oppression, but that also unbalanced mercy is but weakness, which would allow and abet evil. True prayer is as much action as word. It is will. The gods will not do for man what his higher powers can do for himself, if he cultivates will and wisdom. Remember that this earth is but an atom in the universe, and thou thyself but an atom thereon, and that even couldst thou become the god of this earth, whereon thou crawlest and grovellest, thou wouldst even then be but an atom and one among many. Nevertheless, have the greatest self-respect, and to that end sin not against thyself. The sin which is unpardonable is knowingly and wilfully to reject spiritual truth, but every sin and act leaveth its effect. To obtain magical power, learn to control thought. Admit only true ideas which are in harmony with the end desired, and not every stray and contradictory idea that presents itself. Fixed thought is a means to an end. Therefore, pay attention to the power of silent thought and meditation. The material act is but the outward expression of the thought, and therefore it hath been said that the thought of foolishness is sin. Thought, therefore, is the commencement of action, and if a chance thought can produce much effect, what cannot fixed thought do? Therefore, as has been already said, establish thyself firmly in the equilibrium of forces, in the center of the cross of the elements, that cross from whose center the creative word issued in the birth of the dawning universe. As it was said unto thee in the grade of Theoricus, be thou therefore prompt and active as the sylphs, but avoid frivolity and caprice. Be energetic and strong like the salamanders, but avoid irritability and ferocity. Be flexible and attentive to images like the undines, but avoid idleness and changeability. Be laborious and patient like the gnomes, but avoid grossness and avarice. So shalt thou gradually develop the powers of thy soul, and fit thyself to command the spirits of the elements. For wert thou to summon the gnomes to pander to thy avarice, thou wouldst no longer command them, but they would command thee. Wouldst thou abuse the pure creatures of God's creation to fill thy coffers and to satisfy thy lust for gold? Wouldst thou defile the spirits of driving fire to serve thy wrath and hatred? Wouldst thou violate the purity of the souls of the water to pander to thy lust and debauchery? Wouldst thou force the spirits of the evening breeze to minister to thy folly and caprice? Know that with such desires thou canst but attract the evil and not the good, and in that can the evil will have power over thee. In true religion there is no sect. Therefore take heed that thou blaspheme not the name by which another knoweth his God. For if thou doest this thing in Jupiter, thou wilt blaspheme Yod-He-Vav-He, and in Osiris, Yeshua. Ask of God, and ye shall have. Seek, and ye shall find. Knock, and it shall be opened unto you. So that's a very beautiful and powerful text, and there's untold wisdom to be found within it. I'm going to highlight, for me, what the key points of this are, so we can go even deeper. The first important point that is brought up in the text is that true equilibrium is the basis of the soul. It's not about cutting out one type of activity and skewing towards another. Some people think that the path to the soul, the basis of the soul, is purity. That we need to, stop eating meat and only eat fruit and vegetables, or that we need to stop drinking alcohol, stop putting certain things in our body to be pure. But in fact, doing that is unbalanced. It means that we won't get the nutrition we need. It means that we're artificially forcing ourselves into a way of being that is not holistic, that is not balanced, that is skewing our nature in one direction. Whereas the basis of the soul is in fact equilibrium, according to this text. So while we do want to raise our vibration and we do want to purify, in a sense, ourselves of the things that are no longer serving us, which are like the dead weight of our soul, we should try and have balance in all things, regardless, as we carry out that process. There's no need to mutilate ourselves in the name of spiritual development. Celibacy is another example of this, often taken for granted as a sign of spiritual purity. But Is that really the case, or are we really just distorting our natural way of being and creating an imbalance somewhere else? The other thing that this text raises is the spiritual tests that we'll face in our lives. Thus thou who hast trial and trouble of this life, rejoice because of them, because by their means is a pathway opened to the light divine. If thy trials were not many, couldst thou purge thy soul from the dross of the earth, it asks? The greater thy trial, the brighter thy triumph. And so none of this is to say, as I've said in previous videos, none of this is to say that we should celebrate when bad things happen to us. But we do have to have a recognition that we can transform suffering to make it better serve our growth and development. And we need to realize that trials are a part of the spiritual path, not because there's some kind of ascended master sitting on a cloud who says, oh, you think that you want to be spiritual? Well, we'll just see what happens if I send you misfortune, zap, and kind of engages in a cosmic hazing ritual, which is how some spiritual groups view spiritual tests. That's not what's happening here. But there is a natural process that happens, a karmic process, you might say, whereby if you define yourself as somebody who wants to overcome the world, who wants to become better, who wants to focus on spiritual things and has a different way of relating to the world because of that, the world will hate you for it, and it will try and drag you down for it, because it makes those who are in the world look bad next to you. So that is why there are tests and trials on the spiritual path. And when those trials come, in order to get through them in one piece, psychologically and mentally, we need to find a way of attributing meaning to the suffering. And that's what this text provides. It is the testing of the gold in the fires to make it even more pure, to make sure it's strong, to make sure that there's no imperfections in it. And really the only way to overcome suffering and not let it get the best of us so that we end up spiraling into a long-term depression is to find some meaning in the suffering. Another important thing raised by this text is how it talks about not letting thy victories bring vanity. Increase of knowledge should also have a corresponding increase in wisdom. And then it paraphrases Socrates saying, the one who thinks they know everything knows nothing, and the one who knows nothing is the wisest. It's something that is well known. It's not like this will be the first time that you've heard this bit of wisdom, but it's still something that esoteric orders in particular seem to struggle with. There's people who know a lot, but when it comes to actually being wise, applying all of that knowledge in a skillful way, they fall down and they can't do it, and they're afraid to even try to act as a wise person. They just need to use their knowledge to fact check and correct and criticize others. And this reminds us that that's not the way that you're supposed to develop on the esoteric path, but it also reminds us that knowledge and wisdom are not the same, and that book learning and rote learning all the holy books and all of that is not the same as understanding and experience. We need to avoid thinking that because we have a lot of knowledge that we just know it all, and there's nothing more we could possibly learn. There's always more to learn, and we need to be humble enough intellectually to always be students of life and always be willing to learn more. Otherwise, we'll just become ossified in the existing knowledge that we have, and we won't be able to go out and discover anything new and find true wisdom by constantly changing and constantly testing things out and putting things into practice. So that's the key lesson here. Intellectual humility. Not being hasty to condemn others. Another big lesson here. How do you know that in your place you could have resisted the same temptation as the person you condemn? And even if you could, should you despise one who is weaker than yourself? this sort of jolts us out of our false sense of righteousness towards other people who are doing wrong. It does create a certain hierarchy of strong and weak. That's just an inevitability of life. But it does say to not despise the one who is weaker than yourself. And so this completely reframes the whole issue of seeing the sinfulness of others. The Crowley version, Liber 30, just leaves it there. But in the Golden Dawn original version of the text, it goes on to say, pardon the sinner, but encourage not the sin. So there's still an acknowledgement that sin is wrong, that there's certain types of behavior that are harmful to other people, which perhaps are harmful to society, which should be off limits. But the sin is not the sinner, and you can separate the two, and you can not despise the sinner, but still not encourage the sin. So there's some good lessons in there about understanding sinfulness. And, you know, it's an antidote to the way that church leaders often teach this doctrine, which is just to shame everybody and to judge everybody and condemn everybody, and not look in their own house, which is full of wickedness and corruption, actually, the church. So this is giving us a healthier way of viewing the doctrine of sin and how we should approach sin in ourselves and in others. And again, the lesson is humility. You might think that you're holy, but you have the same imperfect nature as everybody else. You're just as prone to deviating from the true path. And so this is something we always have to remind ourselves, because again, often in esoteric groups, you get a lot of people with this holier than thou attitude, that those other people, they're just like the slaves or whatever else. But we're all human, and we are all variations of the same innate characteristics. And so we just need to be humble enough to remember that when we're observing and commenting on the evils of other people. There's some good advice in here on dealing with the spirits. It is by flattering thy weaknesses that the evil one will gain power over thee. It's very true. This is more so relevant to working with demons, which I do not recommend, again. But if a spirit is testing you and it's trying to push the boundaries that you have set up to make sure that you have power and sovereignty over your own being, the way that they will try and do that is through temptation. It'll be through saying that they can give you something you want and trying to renegotiate the boundaries that you have set with the spirit. And it's not just in the context of dealing with spirits that this is the case. It's with other human beings as well. So some good lessons in there, and some good lessons about how to deal with the spirits without being too lenient, but also without being too disrespectful, which I think speaks for itself. Another important lesson: a person's actions affect not only themselves, but those with whom they are brought into contact, either for good or for evil. This is an extremely important lesson. So can we get a bit more specific about some examples of this in practice? If you've got someone who's really intensely spiritual, often what you'll see, unfortunately, is that they're very disconnected from the world and very disassociated from the rest of the world and from other people. And what this leads to is a kind of indifference to what's going on in the world. And there's a tendency to just present themselves as one who has risen above and transcended all of the troubles of the world. And to take stock of those difficulties would just be to be buying into illusion, would be to be distracting oneself from focusing at all times on the divine or on consciousness or whatever. And that's a very common mentality that we find in spirituality. But this can also be something which is unwise. It can also be something which is harmful. By acting in a certain way, we have effects on other people. That goes without saying. You know, if you go to the shops and you use a trolley and then you don't put the trolley back, it makes it harder for the next person to find a trolley. And somebody else is going to have to move it. If you throw rubbish on the floor, somebody else is going to have to pick it up instead of you. And you're causing a harm for somebody else. You know, we used to understand that as a society, but increasingly it seems like we don't. But you can see how, you know, if you're not conscientious, it causes harm down the track. We at least used to understand that much more as like a positive action, but even a lack of action. You think of the bystander effect as an example of this. Seeing something bad happening to another person and not doing anything to intervene. You know, and it's not always our business to get involved, which is another thing that requires wisdom. But if there's a clear moral prerogative that we need to follow and we fail to do so, we're allowing evil to spread. And so while we might think that we're transcending the world and by disconnecting from the problems of the world, we're in fact just causing harm by doing that. That we're not actually being truly neutral as much as we think we are. We're actually enabling harm. And as spiritual people, we should be trying to minimize harm for all human beings. There's some good stuff in there about looking after your physical body, tempering the passions, nourishing the higher aspirations. The Golden Dawn version of this text says the emotions are purified by suffering, which sounds very Catholic. In Crowley's version, he says discipline the emotions and reason instead, which to me is a slightly less masochistic sounding version of pretty much the same thing. Here's something else that's very important. Do good unto others for God's sake, not for reward, not for gratitude from them, not for sympathy. This is something that's very important to grasp and something which is very difficult for a lot of people. In order to be truly good, you need to do good for its own sake, not because of what you're getting out of it. And a lot of people, if they self-examine, they'll find that the real reason they want to do something is because they want someone to like them, to get that person's attention, or because they want something in return. And in order for our intentions to be truly good, we need to understand that moral action is its own end. It is both the means and the end. And when we do that, we engage in dharma. And when we do that, we cut off karma. We cut off karmic action. That's one type of karmic action that will stop repeating and stop accumulating karma in our lives. And it becomes a dharmic action. It becomes action dedicated to God. So this is actually a very important lesson, and it's something that people have a very hard time grasping. How many people actually have experienced unconditional love? How many times have you had some significant person in your life who does something really nice for you, which seems like a gift, which seems like it's something that's done out of the goodness of their heart simply because they love you? And then later down the track, if you don't do something for them, the past gets brought up and I did this for you, you didn't appreciate it when I did this for you, how could you not do this when I've done so much for you? And suddenly there's a string attached, and the relationship is not really one of unconditional love at all. It's actually transactional. My love is conditional on you giving me this. In order to truly do good to one another, we need to love one another unconditionally. And so when we do nice things for each other, we need to do it just because we want to, because it's the right thing to do. And that is the only way that we will truly establish righteousness in society. But again, this is something which people who present themselves as spiritual seem to struggle with a lot. Or if not people who present themselves as spiritual, then people who present themselves as being very moral. The classic example would be the bro who films themselves giving money or food to a homeless person for clicks. You know, presents themselves as being a very moral, caring person, but really it's just about their own ego and how much attention they can get and how much praise from others they can get. There's some good stuff in there about not praying to God for things you can just do yourself. True prayer is as much action as word. That's very important to reflect on. Are we praying for something, or perhaps even doing magic for something that we can obtain easily, and thus disempowering ourselves by doing that? This lesson I truly love. Remember that this earth is but an atom in the universe, and thou thyself but an atom thereon, and that even couldst thou become the god of this earth, whereon thou crawlest and grovellest, thou wouldst even then be but an atom and one among many. Incredibly humbling and incredibly transformative in terms of our perspective. You think of all of the great conquerors through history who have tried to make themselves these living gods by creating an empire that will span the world. And then you look at the blue dot photo, literally just a faint blue dot in the universe, in the blackness of space, that you can barely see with the naked eye from a certain perspective. And so you realize how absurd it is that you have these great people of history who think that they have become these powerful absolute rulers, and yet they just control a tiny fraction of a fleck of dust. And so to realize our true place in the universe is very humbling. To be humble like this can be valuable for other reasons. In my experience, at least, when I was first starting out on the path and I felt a sense of calling, I felt a sense of mission, I felt like in order for me to be fulfilled, in order for me to truly be doing my purpose in life, I had to do something which had a huge effect that would affect the entire world and bring the whole world closer to some spiritual understanding. And maybe that's still something that's worth aiming for, that's still valuable. But our work is not important because of the scale of the change that it achieves. Whether that's in spirituality or in trying to change society in some way. The true thing that we should be focusing on is not the scale of our accomplishments, but the intrinsic value, not the quantity, but the quality of what we are creating if we're trying to create something great in the world. Real, authentic beauty and truth is more important than how famous someone is or how much attention something gets. There's some good advice here which basically relates to the power of positive thinking. The material act is but the outward expression of thought. Thought, therefore, is the commencement of action, and if a chance thought can produce much effect, what cannot fixed thought do? Basically, your thoughts can shape reality. So not only should you watch what you think, but focus a thought, and then you'll see it manifest before you. Basically the secret. It's basically the core understanding behind magic and manifestation. So very valuable information there. And then we get to the 4 elements and the elementals of those elements, and relating it to different vices and virtues, you might say, which is very similar to what the Gnostics did in their vision of escaping the world of the demiurge to reunite with the pleroma. It's encouraging us to identify certain types of sin, or if you prefer, ego-based behavior, or if you prefer, habits which are not helpful to us. And then it's identifying those, and it's relating them to the 4 elements. But then it's also showing us how each one of those vices is really just the distortion or the exaggeration of a natural way of being, a way of being that is virtuous. So, for example, in the case of air, be thou therefore prompt and active as the sylphs, but avoid frivolity and caprice. So it's good to move in life. It's good to keep moving. It's good to be able to take action when we need to take action and not to hesitate. But if we take that to an extreme, we become frivolous. If we take that to an extreme, we become capricious. So just making sure that we wind that back. Be energetic and strong like the salamanders. Activity, vitality, great, but avoid irritability and ferocity. If our assertiveness becomes aggression, then it becomes a problem. Aggression which is not warranted for the situation, I should say. And that's the element of fire. Being able to be flexible, being able to use your imagination and visualize things like the undines, like the element of water, all very good. But avoid idleness. Don't get lost in your fantasies. If you become too idle, that's going to be something that affects your ability to function in life. And don't be too changeable. If you're too flexible, you become too changeable. Finally, be laborious and patient like the gnomes. Pay attention to your physical world. Pay attention to obtaining the things that you need, looking after your body, looking after your family. But avoid grossness and avarice. Don't take more than you need. Don't become greedy. Don't become gluttonous. And so we see how each element can be out of balance. We can have an excess of that element. And really what we want is to have all four elements, and we want to have all of those elements balanced, equally balanced with one another. And so we see again the theme of the balance of forces, and balance being the true nature of the soul that is highlighted in this text, and really is the key underpinning our understanding of all of our self-development and spiritual refinement as we go along the path. There is another lesson that is given in this text which is of the utmost importance, which is to do with mercy and severity and balance, in the sense of balancing those two. Remember that unbalanced force is evil, that unbalanced severity is but cruelty and oppression, but that also unbalanced mercy is but weakness, which would allow and abet evil. And often when we think of evil, we think of the former, of unbalanced severity. Virtually every example of evil that has been presented in the movies for the past 70 to 80 years has taken this form. But equally evil is unbalanced mercy. And in today's political landscape, we are beginning to see some of the catastrophic effects of unbalanced mercy and how it can allow and abet evil in ways we could barely even imagine. So it's a very relevant lesson, but I'm not going to go into any more detail on it in this video because I've done an entire video on this very topic, which is my video on the two pillars. So if you want more information on that, I'll leave a link in the description below. And then this final lesson I think is very important. In true religion there is no sect. Therefore take heed that thou blaspheme not the name by which another knoweth his God. If thou blasphemes Jupiter, thou will also blaspheme Yod-He Vav-He. And so this is very important to remember, that all different deities, all of the different ways that we understand God are just different understandings of a similar kind of a thing. And so when we understand this, it doesn't make sense to blaspheme against one type of God. You're talking about an absolute reality, and you're talking about different cultures, different religions, different times, all using their own level of understanding and using the symbols that are familiar to them to try and grasp that absolute reality. So if you blaspheme one type of God, say for example, if you blaspheme Jesus, you're not just blaspheming Jesus, you're blaspheming God. You're blaspheming the ideal of the spiritually perfected human being. You're blaspheming the sun God, which you may or may not follow. You're blaspheming the life-giving principle in the universe. And so we need to understand that all these symbols are signifiers of something deeper, and we need to not be superficial in our understanding of religion. You know, a lot of the same people that condemn Jesus and think that it's funny to make fun of Jesus and Christianity will go to great lengths to say that all the other religions are valid and that there is some deeper truth behind all of them, that the outward forms of that religion are just a esoteric representation of. But they'll make an exception for Christianity, but that's an unwise way of being. We need to not necessarily respect all religions, because I think there's a lot of things that specific religions have brought into the world that are abhorrent, but the underlying truth that all religions are pointing to is something that needs to be respected. And the fact that this is something that someone has come up with in the past, imperfect though it might be, which helps us get closer to that, is something that should be respected. Modern secularism won't get you closer to God. Modern secularism can't do any of that, but religion can. And so religion should be respected. And a blasphemy against one is a blasphemy against all. So respect the sacred. Don't go around burning churches. So we see there a number of very valuable lessons in this text on the general guidance and purification of the soul. And I hope that I've highlighted those for you and gone a bit deeper into some of the real wisdom of this text. And I hope that you've benefited from it and it's given you something to think about. And if you did enjoy this video, please like and subscribe, hit the notification bell so that YouTube actually notifies you of my future videos. Leave any comments you have down below. If you want to support me further, hit join or thanks, or go to the merch store. But thank you again for listening, and I'll see you next time.